This is the Fat Loss Pro Podcast.
Fat Loss Pro Podcast.
Discover what's needed to burn, build, and shape the body you want. You'll walk away knowing what you need to do to create results now. Chris DeFay is the authority on fat loss and getting you in shape. Cutting edge, results-based info from the world's best that unveils the curtain to quicker, simpler, no-nonsense fat burning, muscle building, and quality health.
Welcome to the Fat Loss Pro podcast. I am the Fat Loss Pro, Chris DeFay, and this is another episode where I'm positive you are going to be making smarter decisions and being able to change what you do to get in better shape. Today, I have a man that I have learned a lot from, look up to, and respect very much. John Meadows has been someone that I've admired for some time, and due to what I've learned from him has worked so well. He has a realistic application of the, yes, science and studies show importance, but being in the trenches and applying them to ourselves and also to the clients that we have shows what works and what doesn't, always constantly evolving. We get to delve into some great topics, especially how you can make your nutrition around your workouts fast track your results. Now, I just want to say a very big thank you to you again plugging me and the Fat Loss Pro podcast between your ears. It's only been a short while since starting this and the feedback has been phenomenal. I would still love for you to be able to give me your thoughts, as really if I can have your suggestions on what you want, then I can deliver upon that. Now head to www.chrisdufay.com where you're only going to be able to get more freebies and goodies, including my video insights and plans. With the Fat Loss Pro podcast now tipping over the 1,000 downloads a day, I'm kicking it up a gear to give you the info you want. So have your say, jump on the site, and I'm going to be able to give you the material you want. Now, enough of me chin wagging. Let me hit play and let's have this chat with John Meadows, as you are going to be frothing on what this information is going to give you. John, thanks very much for coming on to the Fat Loss Pro podcast, mate. I really appreciate you taking the time out for me and the listeners. I'm a huge fan of the beliefs and the angles and everything that you use for your training and your diet methodology. I've got to tip my cap and I say I use a lot of it for myself and also apply the principles for my own clientele. So just before we kind of delve into anything and showcasing how you work, for the person that has been living under the rock, can you tell them who John Meadows is and why he's so phenomenal?
Well, I don't know about phenomenal.
Oh, come on, John. Don't be humble.
My name's John Meadows, and I started training back when I was an early teenager and actually competing, 13 years old to be exact. And I've enjoyed it, and I'm 42 now, so I've been enjoying it for 29 years. I've never stopped. I've, even in my younger years, I was always the annoying kid at the gym asking questions. How can I do this? How can I do that? I always was very inquisitive, and I wondered how things worked, why they worked. Eventually, that kind of seeped over into my, nutritional methodology. I'm fortunate to have had some good mentors. I've been mentored since 1999 by Dr. Eric Serrano. He keeps a low profile, but he's the absolute by far smartest guy in the industry by far. When I tell people that, and they're kind of like, yeah, okay, and then they come and talk to him, and they're like, wow, you weren't kidding, were you? I'm like, no, he knows to a very deep level so many different things: training, nutrition, supplements, rehab. I mean, he does surgeries. He's a brilliant doctor.
Can I just jump in quickly, John? I think it's really important. It's a great point that you've brought up. Obviously, having like a mentor, even like it kind of transverses into having a coach at the same time. But for people that are like, yes, you know what, that resonates with them and they do know they need a mentor. How did you work with Dr. Serrano? Like, did you just, give him a call and say, mate, I've got some questions. Can we have a bit of a chat? Like, what was the relationship? How did it work?
Well, he was an invitation-only doctor at the time.
Yeah.
And there was a high demand for him. Every professional and college sports team around this part of the country had asked him to be their team physician. He told them no. He was very happy with his own practice. But I knew a couple people, Mike Francois, that knew Eric, and Mike Francois was one of Eric's patients, and some other guys. And Eric had heard about me, and I called the office. The nurses kind of put the stiff arm on me, and it was like, okay. But I didn't give up. I called again a month later. I got the stiff arm again. Sorry, you're not a current patient. He's not accepting new patients. And I even told him, well, I heard that he said I could come see him, blah, blah, blah. So eventually, I think it was 5 months into it, I called again and I said, look, I'm just going to keep calling. And so I came in to see Eric, and I had a notebook full of questions. Probably 40 questions would be my guess. And I just said, hey, look, I know you can't get to all these today, Eric, but just however much time I have with you, I want to go. And he was very impressed. He was like, you're a bodybuilder and you actually want to get smarter and you want to get educated? And he was shocked by that, that I wasn't the typical meathead that, I know everything, blah, 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 blah. So I think he saw my passion for learning right then. And, every time I come and see him to this day, I have a notebook with questions that I ask him. Now, instead of 40 questions, it might only be 3 or 4 or 5. And he has a chance to go into each one in more detail. But over the years, he became a tremendous friend of mine, one of my best friends in the world, actually. And I can't say enough about him. And I also can't say enough about finding somebody like him to be a mentor. Believe it or not, you're not the smartest person in the world. That's what I tell people. There's people that you could benefit from and learn from. And, in my business world, I have a mentor, Dave Tate. Dave owns Elite FTS and is an absolute brilliant businessman. So, I try to keep really good people around me that I can learn from, that are wise and have been through what I'm going through, or worked with enough people that have done what I've done, that they've accumulated a lot of knowledge. And so I think it's real important for people to find somebody like that, kind of latch onto them and learn from them. I can't say enough about that process. You have to. If I didn't have that process, if I didn't have that mindset, I never would have made it in this industry. Never ever would have made it. But it gave me an advantage because it increased my knowledge. Most bodybuilders really have kind of a surfacey knowledge, and they don't really They don't really know why things work or how they work. And certainly we don't have everything figured out. But you can still put in the effort to understand things. And it helps you then when you're working with a lot of people, it helps you formulate your ideas, what you believe in at that point in time, based on the information at that point in time. And, also to me, it just speaks to your passion. If you're really, really passionate about something, you just want to know things. You want to understand.
Yeah, you just want to soak it up.
You just do. So, when I hear people say, just tell me, I'll do whatever, that's cool. I'm fine with that. But it's a little more exciting to me when people are asking questions. When my clients are continually surprised. They're like, you sure you want me asking questions? Because that's not what other coaches have told them. The other coaches have said, just shut up and do what I tell you, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
I was just talking to Fouad the other day, Fouad Abiad. He's a very good bodybuilder in Canada. And I said, man, ask me more questions. And he was like, well, I don't want to be a pain in the butt. And I'm like, you're not a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
I want to teach you. I'm a teacher at heart. A pain in the butt would be somebody who says, hey, do I have to eat a sweet potato or I can eat a red potato? And then the next, it's like, come on, man.
I think that's a really good point, and it brings up. I had another podcast interview just the other day, and we were talking more on the psychology of everything, and she was pointing out that obviously the people that have the coaches that don't allow them to ask questions have the worst repercussions after they stop coaching, because they have just no education on what's going on, and then when they don't have that strict guideline or piece of paper to follow, they just completely fall off the wagon. So it's definitely needed. All right, mate. So I really want you to kind of really give a big spiel about the mountain dog principles. And so I'm a big sort of believer of it. So I'd really want you to kind of dig in and, in a nutshell, explain how the mountain dog diet and training methodology works.
Well, first of all, it's an ever-changing methodology. As I learn more and accumulate more knowledge and find out certain things are better than other things, it changes. So it's a methodology, but it's certainly not set in stone. And it's also meant to be adapted to fit a person the best. Training, for example, I may favor 3 particular exercises, and one of my clients may have favored 2 of those, but have a different exercise they just love for their 3rd exercise. I'm not going to tell that person to not do that. That's wrong. If it works for them, it works for them, period. So I just want to make the point that I have philosophies and I have ideas, but none of it is set in stone. It can all be adapted to fit you, so that, you know, what puts a big smile on my face is when someone's worked with me for a year and then they say, hey, you know what? I've done about 90% of what you said, but there was a couple other things that I thought would work great for me. So I did this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And they're kind of afraid to tell me that. Like, I'm going to get upset at them and say, hey, I told you not to do that. But I'm like, that's great. When you find, that's the whole point of this. When you find things that work for you, use them.
Yeah.
You know, it might not work for you in a month, or it might not work for you in 5 years, but at that point in time, when you find things that work for you, use them. And I don't care what other people think. I don't care if you think it's silly to use a band on a certain piece of exercise equipment. If you feel it's working excellent, then do it. So I like for people to really come to understand what works for them. And again, that's something that can change over the course of time. But as you get better and better at that, you kind of get in these modes where you know what, this is kind of not working so much anymore. And you learn how to think and correct it. Our industry has a massive shortage of creative thinking. There's not a lot of people that know how to problem solve. People know how to dictate out of textbooks. People know how to dictate PubMed studies, but they don't know how to think outside the box.
Yeah, they're simply just regurgitating what they may have just read, not really applying it to the person or the client in front of them.
Exactly. It's a giant regurgitation field. Well, I read that so-and-so said that, nutrient timing doesn't work. Well, we would have a pretty good argument on that, and I'm pretty sure that I could make a pretty strong case that it does work.
Yeah.
So, I encourage people to learn, to think about what they're doing, to learn their bodies. And when you find something that works for it, go for it, roll with it. That's essentially what I did. What I did, so I'll start talking about training, was a lot of my philosophies. Some of them I stumbled on by accident. Some of them other people taught me. And I always like to give credit to other people who taught me. And sometimes, I just figured stuff out. It was like, well, this isn't working for my back. This angle doesn't work. This exercise doesn't work. So what else can I do? And, there's kind of a whole hodgepodge of things that kind of build up this ideology that I have on training. I started training, obviously, when I was 13. And I did, I did like anybody else. I pulled out magazines and I just did the workouts that the magazine said. And I was shoving a ton of food down. I had a real fast metabolism. I wrestled, I played football, I ran track. So, I was eating nonstop. I would eat a cherry pie every night before I went to bed to gain weight. I remember just doing all kinds of stuff to try to gain weight. And, I learned through magazines initially. Muscle and Fitness used to have this section called a kinesiology, and it would show all the muscles involved in certain movements. And I would study them. I would study that page or two. And I remember by the time I got to college, I knew actually in high school, I knew all the muscles in your hamstring. I knew like the extensors in your forearm and the flexors. I knew stuff you're not supposed to know when you're that young. So, I remember going to, eventually then I go to college, and I'm in my kinesiology class, and it was incredibly boring because I could do that stuff with my eyes closed. And he was, teaching one day, and he said something to the effect of, am I boring you? And I said, no, man, you're just, this stuff is great. I love it. I just wish you could make it more exciting. And he looked at me and he said, well, do you want to teach a class? And I said, I'll take a shot if you'll let me. So he let me teach the class for the day. I got up, and I remember it was, we were talking about, glutes and hams and calves and all those muscles. And so I had a pretty good knowledge of, where origins were, where insertions were, how, the extension, flexion, all that kind of fun stuff. And I was showing people, and I had done a contest like 6 weeks before, so I was still kind of lean. It was hot outside, so I owned shorts, and I was kind of showing people where the muscle insertions were, and everybody kind of gathered up to the front of the class, and they were real interested. And long story short, so at the end of the class, I said, okay, well, thanks. And the professor was like, wow, that was pretty good. And, so we became good friends. I think he was pretty irritated with me at first, but then he just saw, man, this kid just loves this stuff.
Yeah.
So I've always liked that, the kinesiology of it, the physiology of it. Those are things I always found I really enjoyed and did well. Now, there were some other things, like math and chemistry and some other classes that I absolutely got destroyed in. Actually, economics and accounting. Economics and accounting were my two big classes that I just hate. I couldn't stand. But anyway, so as I got older, I was learning from magazines. I went to college, at a college called Wilmington College in Southern Ohio, and this is where I would say my first real learning started. I went to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with John Perillo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So John, as you know, has been around a long time, coached a lot of people. That his performance center was about a half-hour drive from where I went to college. So I trained at his facility. One of the guys that worked for John, his name was Mike Masson, was my first coach, and he started with me when I was 19. And what happened was I kept calling in the Perillos, and I didn't have any money, man. I was the typical college kid. I was broke. I was broke. And I kept asking questions. I was dieting, and really, what I was doing was I was eating cans of low sodium tuna, an occasional sweet potato, and I was eating bags of lettuce.
That's hardcore.
It sucked, yeah. But I got really, really shredded. Even though that sucked, I couldn't eat. I couldn't imagine eating steaks and things like that. I just didn't have the money.
Yeah.
So I was constantly calling into Perillo's office and saying, hey, what about this? And eventually the guy was like, oh, is this John again? Because I wasn't buying any of their products. I just kept calling, asking questions. He was like, John, you have to be a customer. I was like, I know, man. I know. I'm just running a little short on money right now, and I kept asking questions. Well, what do I do at 2 weeks out? What do I do with this? And the guy was really annoyed, but he helped me. So he just knew I was some guy named John. So there was a contest coming up, the Teenage Mr. Cincinnati, which back then was the biggest teenage show in Ohio. And actually, that's kind of a good trivia question. I believe, at least they claim it is, the Mr. Cincinnati was the oldest bodybuilding show in history. That's what they've always advertised it as anyway. So I went to the show, I did the show, I won the show, and then Monday I called back in and I said, I want to talk to Mike, and Mike gets on the phone. He's like, oh, this is John. I said, Mike, I'm the guy that won. He's like, really? He's like, I was judging. And I said, man, I just wanted to thank you. You gave me a lot of advice. And then he could see that I wasn't somebody just trying to suck information out of him. I was actually doing what he said.
Yeah, you earned the chops.
Which is what 99.9% of people don't do when they get free advice. If you get free advice, you don't follow it. That's generally how human nature works. But I was actually doing what Mike said. So I called to thank him, and he's like, well, why don't you come and see me? And that's how I got it. So he invited me to come to the Perillo place. And Mike taught me the value of hard work. I mean, he absolutely destroyed me. He was, people see my videos and they see some of the things that I do and how difficult some of it is. Mike had me doing that stuff when I was 19. He was just absolutely destroying me, killing me. And, I was living off some college aid at the time. So I started being able to get some more food, more brown rice, and it was still kind of the basics.
You're starting to lash out.
Yeah, I was getting real creative, right? So, so I did a couple more shows that year, and I won them both. And Mike, I like to give Mike credit. He was my first ever coach, and he pushed me really hard, and he was very, very honest with me. And there were many times he told me things that I didn't want to hear. But I have so much respect for him because he was honest enough to do that. And he had high expectations for me. This is kind of what I like to do with people. I have high expectations for him. And I know how it felt when he was honest with me. And so I try to be honest with everybody else. If it's an answer I know they're not going to like to hear, the conversations I had with Mike always ring back in my mind. No, you remember, 5 years from now, this person will have way more respect for you if you're just honest with them. Yeah. Don't butter them up and tell them something that's not true. So that took me into my early 20s. And what I had learned about training at that point is that, honestly, was that it just needed to be really hard. You really needed to push yourself really, really hard to the limit. I wasn't thinking about periodization or overtraining or undertraining or any of that. All I knew was that when I'm in the gym, I need to push myself really hard.
Can I just pop in, John? Do you think the biggest factor a lot of people are missing out, because obviously they're trying to really overcomplicate things, or they're really trying to sort of like major in the minor, is they're just simply not training hard enough?
Well, let me tell you this. If you ask most coaches what the biggest training mistake that's made is, they will tell you it's overtraining. Now, I want you to think about something. Think about the last time you were at the gym. Think about the last 5 times. And unless you work out in a really rare hardcore gym, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, overtraining is not an issue.
Yeah.
You see people sitting around their cell phones. You see people goofing off. I absolutely don't believe that people train hard enough.
Yeah.
And people like to make excuses. You're doing too much, blah, blah, blah. But you don't really understand what your body's capable of, and especially what it's capable of when you feed it right and you rest.
Yeah.
Don't give our bodies enough credit. They really don't. And it's rare that I see somebody who I think has truly overtrained. It's extremely rare. But it's not rare at all to see people who are undertrained. I see hundreds of them every single day. I'm absolutely a big believer in that people just don't train hard enough. They don't, you know what? Here's one of the things I like to say. And I heard this from Ben Pekulski. Ben and I were talking one day, and Ben said this actually, and I said, dude, I'm going to steal that from you, and I'm going to tell it on every radio show I'm on. we were talking about intensity. And Ben said at the end of the day, you've got to get your balls out of your purse for probably 5 or 6 sets, meaning you've got for probably 5 or 6 sets out of your workout, you've got to unleash. I mean, unleash. And I couldn't agree more. If I've got 4 exercises I'm doing, the last set on each exercise, many of the times is going to be something that I'm just pushing really, really hard into the brink. And, if you talk to most people, doing any one set like that's too much.
Yeah.
And I think there's also, a lot of the people that are well known on the boards right now and on social media, they're general population people, right? Whereas, you and we're talking about something a whole nother level.
Yeah.
We're talking, when you get somebody to a certain level, it's hard to get them even better. And then if you accomplish that, to get them even better than that, that's even more difficult.
Yeah.
But most of the conversation you hear, like nutrient timing, for example, it doesn't help people that are non-trained, that are just training as much. And for people that are, kind of half-assing it in the gym, and when you're doing your studies and you're using the wrong nutrients.
Yeah, that's not the population we're talking about and the use for it, though.
It's not the population we're talking about. Recreate what we do. Have somebody go in, have them train for 90 minutes, busting their ass, and then you tell me if structuring their food a certain way and their nutrients a certain way doesn't help recovery, because it absolutely does, and it's indisputable in my opinion. But, so I think people, generally speaking, need to train a lot harder. I didn't say heavier, I said harder.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point that you've made as well, because that's a big difference, or a sort of a big definition change with what people need to take on as well. It's not about going heavier. That's not the intensification factor we're talking about.
No, it's not. And you can go heavier, and you can actually lose intensity on the muscle group being trained, because all of a sudden you have your connective tissue and other muscles engaged that you don't necessarily want to be primary. I'm a big believer in form. Really, the old mind muscle connection that's been talked about for decades, that still holds true today. If you think about yourself, I'm sure that your better body parts are the ones that you have the better mind muscle connection with. They're the ones that pump up the best. And anyway.
Can I just ask, John, for the person that doesn't quite grasp the whole sort of mind-muscle connection, because they might just not have the training age or experience behind them, or that sort of expertise, how do you explain that to that person?
Well, there's certain things that you can show them that I've learned over the years to help them. There's things that you can talk to somebody about, like, for example, you can say, okay, I can't feel my biceps. Then I can sit here and I can say, okay, well, in your barbell curls, I want you to slow down the eccentric. At the bottom, I want you to come to a complete stop, and then I want you to flex the weight up. Don't swing it up. Don't push it up with your hips. So you can give people these cues. But there's also other exercises that help. Like, let's say somebody can't feel their chest.
Yep.
You can put somebody on like a hammer strength machine and put bands on it. Very, very lightweight. But as they push against the bands, their pecs will contract really hard.
Yep.
And anybody that's done a banded chest press will tell you the exact same thing. It literally forces you to contract your pecs, as long as your body is positioned properly and you're not all hunched over or something weird going on. So there's a lot of things that I show people, and I've got them on videos on my YouTube channel. And then there's a lot of things you can do with, whether it be slowing down the rep or changing your exercise sequence. Sometimes people will say, well, I can't feel my pecs when I bench. Okay, well, I'm going to trash your pecs, and then I'm going to put a third in your routine, and then tell me if you feel it. And then you're like, oh, holy cow, man, yeah, I could feel it. It was dead, but I could feel it. So there's all kinds of things you can do. People give up way too easy. It took me, I would say, 8 to 10 years to really be able to feel my back the way I want to feel it. That was something for me that and coincidentally, my back was my worst body part. So, it took me a long time. I trained with a lot of powerlifters, and they all just said, John, do chins, deadlifts, and bent over rows, and your back will get huge. Well, I did that, and it did not get huge.
Yeah.
It took something more from me. I had to get much more lat recruitment, and I really had to do other exercises to get my back to grow. But generally speaking, you take momentum out of movements, you finish contractions, and you flex the target muscle. There's things that you can do with bands that help. There's a number of things. I should probably write an article on that for each body part.
I think that's an excellent idea.
There's some muscles that are kind of a whole nother level of difficult. Like when someone says, I can't feel anything in my vastus lateralis, my quad sweep. Mm-hmm. That's a little tougher to teach because that's not a muscle that is like, say, your biceps or calves that you can just fire up real easy.
Yep.
There's a lot more cueing, body position, where you got your feet, how your toes are pointed. There's a lot more. That's a lot deeper discussion there. But as you do these things over the years, and as a coach, I've seen everybody talk about every possible muscle I think in their body, and not being able to feel it. So it's a challenge to me to always have ways to overcome that.
And so, what are your thoughts on training frequency when it comes to, say, a lagging body part as well? Are you a fan of, say, obviously doubling up on that body part to bring it up?
Well, I am. But there are a couple things that need to be in place.
Yeah.
Person's nutrition and plan has to be set up so that the recovery is really good. I think I don't think it's necessarily wrong to train a muscle that's a little bit sore, but if you get somebody that's trashed, for example, sitting down, your legs hurt so bad you feel like you're crippled. Yeah. I don't know that it's productive to then have them go in and do another workout on their legs when their legs feel that bad. By the way, I don't think anybody ever needs to feel that bad. That's a whole nother discussion.
Okay. Yep. Good point.
But I think that you got it. If you're going to increase training frequency, which I think is a great idea, you have to first of all have the recuperation in place. You have to be able to physically do it. Sometimes you might be a little sore, but as you continue to increase frequency, you can overcome that a little bit by just old repeated bout effect. But all these people saying that repeated bout effect applies universally, and all you got to do is just keep training more and more and more. I don't believe that. I think there's an element of recovery and nutrition that has to happen for this to be done optimally. There's a difference between getting through a workout and a workout being productive. Those are two totally different things.
Yeah.
Repeated bout effect will probably allow you to get through a workout, but it's not guaranteeing you that it's going to be productive. Doesn't mean it's not, but there's no guarantee. So you have to have that in place. And second of all, why is a body part weak in the first place? Yeah. If you're training it wrong and you can't feel it, well, training it wrong more isn't going to help.
Two wrongs don't make a right. That's a good point.
It's like when you have somebody posing before a contest and they're posing wrong. Is the answer to have them pose for another 30 minutes a day? I don't think so. They're just further reinforcing everything they're doing that's wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to look at the person, to say they can't feel their chest, their chest is weak. You have to look at how they're executing their exercise, what they're doing, because it may be something that needs to be changed in their program, and that'll fix the problem. So before you jump into frequency, you need to have a little bit of an idea of what's wrong in the first place. And if they're doing everything wrong, if they're, you're using too much momentum, if they're using too much shoulder and tricep, what have you, whatever, those are the things that you got to address first. And then once you're confident, okay, this person, they're doing everything right, then you can add some frequency. But I think those when those are the two things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's really good, and I think that segues over perfectly as well to going over to the proper recovery with the nutrition and obviously your unique value towards training nutrition around the workouts. Obviously, can you just kind of put it into a neat little tidy package for someone, how you structure your pre-workout, during workout, and obviously post-workout nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely. Food, supplements, and food is how I would do it. But let me explain that a little bit more. First of all, nutrition around training is a very big deal to me. It's something that I'm known for because I'm such a believer in it. And I also want to say it doesn't apply to everybody. The people who get the most benefit out of it are the ones that are training really hard, with some volume, some intensity. I don't think that some of these nutritional, these intra-workout concoctions that I'll talk about have the same benefit for somebody that's doing, say, a slow workout, where they're doing singles and doubles.
Yeah.
You gotta understand it's not for everybody. If somebody's not training real hard, well, why do you need help with recovery if you're not training real hard in the first place? So It's not for everybody. I want to say that first of all, it's not for everybody. But if you're training really hard and your goal is hypertrophy, if you want to put on a lot of muscle, this is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best ways to do it. So if we started a pre-workout meal, the timing of it's going to vary. You don't want somebody to have a bunch of food sitting in their stomach as they head into the workout, but you also don't want them to be hungry either. So, for most people, 45 minutes to an hour, a small pre-workout meal works pretty good. Mm-hmm. The structure of the meal is nothing fancy. It's it's protein, carbs, and fat in a kind of a moderate sized meal. I like things that digest easy, so I'm probably not going to have steak and eggs 45 minutes before I train. I'm probably going to just have something like a whey protein shake or some fish or some chicken. I'm probably not going to have 10 ounces of meat. It's probably going to be something more like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Carbohydrates, there's a lot of different ones that I like. I don't particularly care about glycemic index and those things. I'm kind of known for having people eat cream of rice, but I don't care if it's oatmeal. I don't care if it's Ezekiel toast. I don't care if it's sweet potatoes. I really don't care. I don't think you need a ton of it, though. I think, 30, 40 grams of carbs for most guys is plenty.
Yep.
And I also like to include a little bit of fat. This is where a lot of people disagree with me, and that's okay. I understand. I like to include somewhere around 8 to 10 grams of fat, and my reasoning for doing that is so that glucose enters the blood a little more steadily, and if with cream of rice particularly, that stuff's granulated and it gets in quick. So what you don't want is your pancreas to produce this big insulin burst.
Yeah.
And then while you're training, your blood sugar get low, and you feel hypoglycemic, which happens to a ton of people, by the way. So I add the fats in just a little bit, just to slow the entry of glucose into the bloodstream, which then minimizes the how intense the magnification of the insulin spike, we'll call it.
Yeah, nice wording.
So you got, yeah. So you've got a little bit, not bad for a poor white boy, huh?
I love it.
So then you've got this small meal in you to give you some fuel as you train. The worst thing in the world is to try to go through an intense workout when you're hungry. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
So then what do you do while you train? I believe there are certain nutrients that are really, really good while you train. I believe that most of the stuff sold today doesn't provide much benefit at all while you train.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's only going to be protein and carbs. And if you look at protein, you don't want something that needs digested. Anybody that has any nutrition background can tell you that. You don't want to have a bunch of food in your stomach while you're training. You don't want to be consuming, for instance, whey isolate, because your body needs to break it down.
Yeah.
So it's going to sit in your stomach. It's going to, and it's not going to break down and be of any use for you. Okay.
Yeah. It's not going to digest, and if anything, it's pulling blood away from your working muscles.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the types of proteins that I recommend, there's only two: hydrolyzed proteins. Hydrolyzed. So people say, well, what does that mean? Well, that's just a process where they use enzymes to break the protein down into di- tripeptides, which just alleviates the body's need to digest it. It essentially goes in your stomach, and then it doesn't have to sit in your small intestine and then move into your large intestine. I mean, it's very quick absorption right into your blood. Now, there's differing qualities of hydrolyzed protein out there too.
Mm-hmm.
Like with any other supplement, some supplements will say, hey, we've got, ALA in this. And then you look and the dose is 25 milligrams. And you think, well, what the hell is 25 milligrams of that going to do?
Yeah.
I need at least 300.
Yeah.
Same thing with hydrolyzed protein. Some people will just hydrolyze a little bit because that is an expensive process. And then they'll say, oh, this is hydrolyzed, but it's only a small part of it, and it's purely to take advantage of consumers not knowing the difference. So, Pepto Pro is something that I've used a lot. It's casein. It's the casein version. I will say that casein hydrolysate seems to work better than whey hydrolysate, and I can't tell you why. I don't know why. But anecdotally, and believe me, I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of people over the last 2 years acting as my guinea pigs, you could say. And casein outperforms whey hydrolysate every single time. Yeah. And I know a lot of people say, well, casein, that's the slow-acting stuff, isn't it? Well, no. Remember, we're talking about hydrolyzing it. Yeah. So,
it's a different state.
Exactly. So the other thing is essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are very good. They're broken down. They absorb very rapidly. If you get a brand that has the complete amino acid pool in it, you're in good shape. A lot of people use BCAAs, and then they want to talk about leucine and mTOR and stimulating insulin. And I don't believe leucine gives you the insulin spike. We'll go back and use that word again. I don't think it gives you the magnitude.
There we go. Thank you.
That you need. Does it turn on mTOR to help with muscle growth? Absolutely. That's been documented a million times. Yeah. All things being equal, though, I'll take essential aminos over branched-chain aminos any day of the week. Yeah. In terms of carbohydrates, so you've got these cheap things out there. You've got maltodextrin and dextrose and waxy maize. And, Vitargo was the first company that came along and said, you really need to look at gastric emptying, how quickly this stuff leaves, once you consume it, how quickly it can get into your blood. So they talk about osmolality a lot, and they had one of the first products that had real low osmolality, and they did a real nice job. And then waxy maize came along, and they started talking about molecular weight. You want a high molecular weight starch and blah, blah, blah. Waxy maize never lived up to its hype, never did anything special. It might give people a little bit better pump during their workout, but it never did anything special in terms of recovery or anything like that. Then branched cyclic dextrin came out, and that's almost the same thing as waxy maize. It's an amylopectin. It's they use, like with the hydrolyzation process with protein, they have a process they use to break down the carbohydrate. Mm-hmm. They use enzymes to break it down, and the result of that is now you've got something that's special. And when you consume it, it's going to literally go right into your blood, and it's a transporter too, because what's it doing? It's stimulating insulin, and insulin is going to help get nutrients, if you've taken some creatine or whatever, and that's in your blood, it's going to help you get all those nutrients into your muscle cells, just because that's what insulin does.
Yeah.
That's one of the things insulin does. It attaches to the cell membrane on insulin receptors, and it allows for entry into the cell. Then you could also talk about GLUT4 translocation as well. The inside of these muscle cells have these carrier proteins called glucose transporters, and they go to the surface of the cell, and they kind of open a door up and let the tidal wave in, so to speak. And this also happens just by mechanical tension. So just by training hard, you get the GLUT4 assistance. So what you have is you load your blood with these nutrients, proteins and carbs that are broken down, that are ready to get right in your blood, and then you train hard. You keep sipping, you keep putting it in your blood, you keep training hard, and you rely on your body's insulin to further augment the process. And now you've got guys getting these massive pumps. You've got guys that are not sore at all, and they can increase their frequency. Their joints feel better. They're not as inflamed. They don't feel like hell. When you're all beat up and you're just beat all to hell, there's probably a lot of inflammation there. Inflammation's actually not a good thing. Well, too much inflammation is not a good thing for insulin sensitivity.
Yep.
And when something else that I can't prove via any research that's been done on it, because nobody has been smart enough to do it yet. Hopefully they'll figure it out pretty soon. I believe that. This whole thing revolves around this muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown ratio. You want more synthesis than you have breakdown. The problem when you train really hard for long periods of time is you get a lot of muscle protein breakdown. I would contend that the way I'm talking about structuring these nutrients while you're training, and more importantly, the right kind of nutrients, I think it greatly decreases muscle protein breakdown. I don't think it's stopping the inflammation response that is critical for hypertrophy.
Yep.
And I'm not saying it eliminates all muscle protein breakdown. I'm just saying it keeps it in check. It keeps it from going out of control.
Yep.
I think that when you train so hard, you're crippled. I think it's out of control. That's muscle protein breakdown out of control. If you got that much muscle protein breakdown, think about how much muscle protein synthesis you need to just break even.
Yeah.
Okay, just to break even. But what if we managed muscle protein breakdown to let's say, only 1/10 of what it used to be? Now all of a sudden it's like, okay, wow, now these essential amino acids might be able to do some pretty cool muscle building. Wow, now hypertrophy is going to happen a little easier. And, the truth is some of these bigger guys I've coached that I've been able to put, 10, 15, 20 pounds of muscle on that were stuck for years, this is how we did it.
Yeah.
There wasn't any special drug or anything like that. I know that's disappointing to people, but it was by increasing training frequency and also turning your training into a primary catabolic activity into one that's providing a huge anabolic opportunity. It's catabolic, but we turn it into a huge anabolic opportunity.
Yeah.
Opportunity if we take advantage of it.
You're able to get a lot more pluses than minuses because you're saving from the breakdown.
You got it. Now, this is my theory, and it's probably not well documented. And I've challenged people to, if they would just try it in a good setting, their results would be really good. And people continue to test crappy sports drinks when I keep telling them you're testing the wrong stuff. You're drawing the right conclusions based on what you're testing, but now people are going to take your conclusion and think it is all encompassing.
Yes.
With all nutrients, and you're clearly misleading you're misleading all these women and men out there. You're labeling something as ineffective when in fact what you proved was that particular set of circumstances you tested was ineffective.
Yeah.
And by the way, I would agree with you on your results, but I don't agree that now we can blanket statement. Then all of a sudden, all over the internet, it's, oh, nutrient timing doesn't work. I put a challenge out once to a nutrient timing proponent, and I said, if you really truly don't believe in nutrient timing, and my version is very refined, by the way. It's what we've just been talking about around intra-workout nutrition.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a whole nother level of nutrient timing that is meals and so forth. And I said, now look, if you really believe what you're saying, I want you to train every morning, and I want you to eat one meal at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I want it to cover all your calories, because a calorie is a calorie, right?
Yeah,
as long as you're getting your 2,500 calories in, you should be okay. It doesn't matter. You're telling me it doesn't matter when you eat it, as long as you eat it. It doesn't matter if it's 1 meal or 5 meals. Okay, so just take me up on my challenge and see what happens. Oh, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Why? Oh, I'll get soft and weak. You know you'll get soft and weak. You know intuitively that type of eating isn't the best for hypertrophy. It's not the best for hypertrophy. Nutrient timing does work for body composition changes. The questions in my mind are just, is it what's better? Is it 4 meals, is it 5 meals, is it 6 meals? And I think that's probably a little different for everybody.
Yeah. And that's probably the minutia that's not necessarily, that might give you the small percentage, but obviously what you're talking about is the leaps and gains where you're going to get the positive results.
Right. Exactly. That's one of those little things that, probably doesn't make a big difference.
Yeah, and it was a really good point, because it's actually a question I was going to ask you later. I can bring it right now. Is obviously your point of view. The kind of way I see how the industry rolls at the moment is it's kind of a pendulum, and you've got one side sitting on one side of the pendulum saying, well, if it's not kind of shown via studies, it's kind of debunked. And you've got the other side, kind of the bro science side, do you know what I mean? Just saying, this is how it works. We don't care if it's shown or anything like that. But I think you've got it great where you stand in the middle. Obviously, yes, certain things are shown via science, but you know what? They haven't tested things properly. They haven't used the right population in their studies. And obviously, from an anecdotal evidence point of view as well, you're showing day in, day out. And as you just said, you've got the guinea pigs running out there right now doing it and showing it.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. I'm not for one side or the other. I think it's sad that there is sides.
Yeah.
I think that what should happen is that people who are doing it should create hypotheses, and we should say, hey, you know what? These are some things. Here are 10 things that I think cause X. And then I think the folks who truly know how to run experiments and control them and so forth, I think then they've got to pick the right population and test those theories the way they're meant to be tested. And then maybe they come back and they say, you know what, 5 of those, wow, we see what you're saying. We're seeing some real good stuff. And then 5 of them, they might say, well, really, we didn't notice anything different. But that's how I wish our world worked in the health and fitness industry. But what happens is, people test random stuff, and a lot of times, and it doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing. And everybody in the industry, especially these young guys, latch a hold of it, and they kind of get this "I'm smarter than you guys" attitude, and so we never really get anywhere.
Yeah, everyone's kind of working against each other rather than trying to work with each other to find the ultimate result.
Exactly, and I always say we're all in this together. We want to look better, want to feel better. So instead of arguing with each other, why don't we try to figure this out together?
Yeah.
And I've said on many times, I will not back down on my beliefs in intra-workout nutrition based on a study, because I've seen something with my own eyes worked hundreds upon hundreds of times. And coaches, most coaches know this. When you see something that works, you know it works. You may not know why it works, and you may have to build various hypotheses and try to figure out why. But when you see something, here's the main thing. A client wants results. A client doesn't care if what they're doing has been proven in PubMed or not. The client wants to get results. So if you have techniques that work and get them results, they're going to be happy. Now, if I were to not introduce any of this intra-workout stuff with the pros I'm working with now, knowing full well that it works, but I'm not going to do it just because so-and-so said it wasn't proven in a study, what kind of coach would that make me?
Yeah.
I think it'd make me a pretty shitty coach, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I think it's a funny point. When I was a shit of a kid of a trainer, one thing I would kind of say at the start when I would have a client was be like, okay, look, firstly, you're going to have to drop the beliefs of anything you've been doing before, because one, what you've been doing has gotten you here so far, and that's not the result that you want. But two, if we go for windy walks on the beach and I read you books, but you get in the shape that you want to, do you know what I mean? Are you still going to be happy? And it's like, well, yeah, well, it's like, okay, well, then you follow through with what I have for you, and it's going to produce the results. Doesn't matter necessarily how it's going to happen. It's got to be done the right way.
Yeah, you get the result. And sometimes you know why, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with this thing called intuitiveness and creativity.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying, I think there's some merit to this idea based on what I've seen. There's nothing wrong with that. Blanket statements, like if I would have said intra-workout nutrition applies to everybody, it works equally for everybody, I don't care how you train, I think I'd be making a false statement. So if you notice at the beginning, I tried to quantify it based on a certain population.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do my part, and I'm trying to look at it from the context of who's it working for, and that's the group that I'm trying to address. I'm not talking in blanket statements, which is often how the other part of the argument goes against it. So I just think that creativity, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's not evil. There's nothing bad about it. You obviously got to be careful and not make blanket statements. But again, that's just kind of where I'm at with some of my theories and thoughts. We didn't talk about post-workout because it's really nothing special. I just tell people to eat when they're hungry. Eat a steak and some rice, or eat some chicken and toast, or if you want to have some eggs and some oatmeal, whatever. You don't really have to worry about replenishing as much as you do normally, because you've just had these nutrients suck right in your blood while you were training.
Yeah.
So you don't need to run down and I've got to get a protein shake right now. You don't need to be in any hurry. I tell people, take your time, chat with your buddies, go home, eat a good meal.
Yeah.
So the meal before training, there's a meal after training, and you have the special drink during training. That's really it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the peri-workout philosophy that I have.
That's perfect. I think as well, everything you've touched on so far that makes so much sense, especially to me and hopefully to the listener as well, was obviously if you're combining hard training and then being able to recover properly from that through the nutrition, but also your training at the same time is programmed and periodized the right way. It's kind of putting everything together to work for you.
It is. It's puzzle pieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You got to get it all to work together. And then if you are going to train really, really hard like that, then periodization becomes a component of that.
Yeah.
Because you can't take your car, you can't redline it 365 days a year.
Yeah.
You just can't do that. I just competed in July, and here we are at September 11th, and on September the 7th, I just started training really hard again. So the entire month of August, I was going in the gym and I was just goofing off.
Yeah.
I didn't strain, I didn't sweat. I was just going in there, having some fun with my friends, goofing off, just basically training the way most other people train. Just giving myself a mental break, a physical break, and now I'm starting to ramp it up again. But you have to have those periods where you back it down. Now, I'm not a big fan of, you may find this interesting, but I'm not a big fan of thinking someone should periodize every 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 weeks. I think it should be more intuitive.
Yeah.
I hear people all the time saying, John, I feel the best I've ever felt. Last week I set some more PRs. I feel like an animal. But it's the end of my program. Should I back it down?
That's such a good point. Sorry, that is such a good point, because that's something I have to constantly repeat, especially to clients as well, just to make sure that they understand is like, guess what? Your body doesn't work in 4-week blocks. Do you know what I mean? Once the 4th week comes up, your body just doesn't say, okay, I'm done. Like, next one is needed. It may need an extra week or two, or may need to be changed earlier. I guess you've just got to use, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you've got to use the results at the end of the day to show.
Exactly. So what I would tell that person is, no, man, you're on a roll. Take advantage of it.
Yeah.
When you come back to me and you tell me, okay, man, everything's feeling slow coming off my chest. I'm not getting a good pump. I'm not as excited to go to the gym. I'm getting more sore than I normally get. I wasn't getting sore at all, but now all of a sudden I'm starting to get sore.
Yeah.
I'm losing reps. Then it's like, okay, now you can deload. Now your body's saying it's probably had enough. It needs to be taken out of the red line and put back in a first gear for a little while. So I believe in periodizing based on how you feel. I know it's hard for some people to understand what it is they're even feeling, but if you train hard, most people know if they're training hard, they come to points where it's like, okay, this last week was really crappy.
Yeah.
And if there wasn't any other variables, like they had to stay up all night, if all variables stayed the same, then then there's other things that are more quantitative, your pulse, your resting pulse rate, things like that. Yeah. There are ways to tell your body's in the red line too long. So, but yeah, so that's how I like to periodize with people. In my programs, I start people off a little lighter in volume, I build it up, and then I take it down at the end. But truthfully, some people need to have volume brought down sooner.
Yep.
And some people don't need to have it brought down at all.
Yeah.
It just depends on the person. It really does. So
with what you just said before, is that kind of like 3 different phases that you would go through in a period? Like starting off, build them up, bring them down?
Yeah. The reason why I do that is because the voluminous, the really hard voluminous stuff that I do is pretty new for most people.
Uh-huh.
And I don't believe that you need to come into it to reap all the benefits full bore.
Mm-hmm.
It's like anything else, if you're walking and you can get a lot of benefit out of picking the pace up and jogging, do that first before you go out and do 100 sprints.
Yeah.
Get the most out of the least. If I get done with a show and I take 2 weeks off and then I go back into the gym, does it make sense for me to pick up right in the middle of a program when volume and intensity are at its highest? No.
Yeah.
I think most people understand that intrinsically. Absolutely not. So I let them build their work capacity up. It would absolutely annihilate them if they were starting at weeks 5 or 6 or 7 at the beginning. They'd be, it would be rough.
Yeah.
And there's no need for that. That's not intelligent programming. Intelligent programming to me is, okay, we're going to give you a little lower volume, but you're going to build up.
Yeah.
You're going to build up. And then we're going to, hit that kind of peak, and we're going to push and push and push and push. And then we're going to kind of back off the pedal. So that's, I'm trying to get the most out of the least is kind of the.
I think that's a great point. And if this makes sense and if it's right along what you think as well, getting the most out of the least is also with how you deal with cardio. Like obviously we don't have to go down that path because we're going to have to wrap up soon to let you go. But obviously getting the most out of the least is obviously you build up the cardio where you see a lot of competitors kind of, okay, I'm 12 weeks out or I'm 8 weeks out. And then they're suddenly just like ramping it straight through the roof. And then they've really got no more cards to play later.
Yeah, exactly. And nutrition too. Same thing. Yeah. You wouldn't go from 5,000 calories down to 3,000 in one change.
Yeah.
So that's a good rule to apply for everything.
Yeah.
For everything.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Minimum effective dose. I like that. Very good. All right, John, I'm going to have to let you go, mate, because you've been very generous with your time and your knowledge. But before I let you go, I'd really like you to give the listener a bit of how they can get in touch with you, also with your site as well, that I'm a big fan of. So any of the links that you mentioned now, I'll pop into the show notes for the episode so people can get straight over to.
Yeah, so I have a website. It's called mountaindogdiet.com. And there's a member website on there where you can get access to a ton of information that's continually being added. It's exact diets I'm using with competitors. It's brilliant articles written by some brilliant PhDs. There's just all kinds of stuff on there. It's exact workouts that we use. That's on there. You can also reach me by Facebook. I have a business page, Mountain Dog Diet business page, and then I have a personal page, John Meadows. I'm also on Twitter at Mountain Dog One, and I'm also on Instagram at Mountain Dog One. By far, the easiest way to reach me is by emailing me through my website. Sometimes my Twitter messages and my Facebook messages pile up so fast, I honestly just don't even see them.
Yeah.
So email is my preferred method of communication. But I would encourage everyone, just do me a favor, go out and take a look at my website. We put a lot of work into it, and sign up. It's $9.95 a month. Sign up, look at the information, and I promise you won't be disappointed when you see all the information on there.
I back that up. Yeah, I back that up an absolute 100% because I've been a member now for quite some time, and you're constantly pumping out good quality information the whole time, and especially for the price. Anyone half interested in their body composition and training pretty much needs to be on there.
Yep, I agree, and we're going to make it better and better too. So.
Excellent. Well, John, thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate everything that you've just been able to dish out.
All right, hey, it's my pleasure. I'm glad I could join, and I'll be happy to join anytime. So thank you very much.
This has been another jaw-dropping podcast from the Fat Loss Pro, Chris DeFay. After subscribing to the Fat Loss Pro podcast,
go to www.chrisdefay.com
to get your free fat loss diet.